So let us look at what we call levels of measurement. What do you basically need to know about this? We know that in statistics we deal with data, but in understanding the nature of data that we are dealing with is very important because it will influence how we can analyze this data, how we can present this data, and how we can present this data. Okay? How we can analyze, how we can interpret on and present this data. This is very, very important. And actually, statistics is all about understanding. It's not more of calculation and derivations at this level. If you see a graph, what interpretations can you make? These interpretations are very important in you in you deciding what to do with the data or even question the data. One of the important skills of statistics or important skills in statistics is that you need to be able to critically evaluate data and be able to decide whether you can rely on the data or you dismiss this data and call for either collection of new data or modification of the data. Okay, so that means that one of the key aspects of knowing this data is an issue to do with the levels of measurements, and especially if you're going to collect primary data or even before collecting data, when you're designing the tool that you will use in collecting this data, it's very paramount that you know the level at which you collect this data. So levels of measurement can be termed as scales, or measurement scales is another one that can be used in this case. And it's not a very complex concept. So let's basically go into the slides and see what this concept entails. So one, that for any characteristic that we are dealing with, or any variable that we are dealing with, we have to assign a figure to that variable. Okay, and the measurement is about determining which figure should we assign to that variable. When we say a variable, we're talking about a characteristic that is not the same, that varies among different objects or different individuals. For example, if we're going to look at height, not all people have the same height. So therefore, height is a variable, age is a variable, even sex, occupation, all these are variables. Okay? So when we are looking at assigning values to these variables, we're basically dealing with an issue to do with measurement. Okay? So this assigning of these values, the values that you will assign will not be the same. Okay, and that means that you need to know what values to assign. And this is when we talk about the scales. Okay, the scales of measurement or measurement scales or basically levels of measurement. Okay, but before we look at that, we need to understand why measurement is actually very important. Okay, measurement is very important because it gives us a very good understanding of the characteristic that we are dealing with, that is a general use of measures. Okay, but also if we know the level at which we are going to take these measurements, it means that it's going to be very easy for us to be able to know how to handle the data that is arising from these measurements. Of course, the measurements will not only be, we're not talking about one measurement, but several measurements. So what meaning do we get out of the measurement? That only comes when we know the level of measurement. And then the second thing is that, of course, we need to make sure that the measurement is representative of what we are actually supposed to measure. Okay, this is what we are meaning by representative of the concept that is actually being measured. So measures, if you want to know my height, you will get a tape measure and take my height, okay? And therefore, from my height, you will know whether I'm medium sized or I'm short or I'm taller than the average person, okay? So it allows us to classify objects or even individuals depending on the characteristic or the variable that we have measured. And at the same time, we can rank objects. The second thing is that we can know to what extent is a particular characteristic different from the characteristics of the others. So the extent of difference. And then the last one, we can calculate the ratios, and we shall know what ratios are shortly. So we have 4 levels of measurements, and these levels of measurements are not really very different from the types of data that we talked about earlier on. Remember, we said that we have 2 broad types of data. And remember, the keyword is quantitative data, because if we are going to use the word 2 broad categories of data, we may not be right. Because if we can say we have 2 broad categories of data, then someone could expect that you're going to talk about qualitative data and quantitative data. But if you say we have 2 broad categories of quantitative data, then someone is likely to say that we have numerical data and also categorical data. Okay? So remember that under categorical data, that's where we have nominal and ordinal. Okay? And then interval and ratio data are the other types of data that we can have. So we can say ratio data, interval data. So you need to be very flexible with these terminologies. And sometimes you will find out that the categorization is that we have categorical data and discrete data. And under discrete data, that's when you have interval and ratio data. Don't be confused about the things. What is actually very important is what they actually mean and how you can apply them. Okay, so ordinal data and the nominal data, these are not new terminologies as far as these sessions are concerned. So we have a statement, and that statement is quite very important. That statement is each scale includes the properties of the ones before it. So if we look at the properties of nominal scale, and then we look at the properties of ordinal scale, what that statement means is that the properties of nominal scale are also the properties of ordinal scale, and then we can add others. So the properties of ordinal scale are the properties of interval scale, and we can add others. The properties of ratio scale are the properties of interval scale, and then we can add others. That's what that statement means, that they also include the properties of the scale that is above it or before it. So that means this kind of arrangement from nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio is very important. It's not by mistake that we are writing them just like that. Okay, so let's go through these different scales and understand them better with examples and how we can handle them. Okay, that's also very important. So nominal data or nominal scale. Okay, so the nominal scale, we are not interested in the order. Any order, we can take that. So this is where you have gender. Whether you say female first or male first, it doesn't really matter. Same thing with blood group. If you say I'm blood group A, blood group AB, blood group O, this doesn't matter to us. Okay, doesn't matter to us whether we start with blood group O and then AB and then A and then B. It doesn't really matter. So we basically use them for proper categorization of data such that we know which category we fall in, but it doesn't carry a lot of meaning there. especially the order. The order does not carry a lot of meaning. So we basically use this for consistent organization of data, such that we know you belong here, you belong there, and that's that. So we can, the statistics that we can use here when you are handling such type of data is that we can count the individual objects or data set characteristics that we are having. Okay, how many females, how many males? That's the count. And then the next one, the mode, which is basically the most frequent characteristic in this case. And then frequency comparisons. Okay, can we say that men are more likely to be involved in an accident compared to ladies? Or ladies are more likely to buy cosmetics than the men? We see, for comparison, what happens. Okay, and then ordinal. Ordinal, we are interested in the order. So that means we need to rank, we need to follow that order. So we need ranks. The ranks are very important. So we can rank, for example, social class, upper economic class, the people who are the top earners, middle income class, and then the low income earners. The category matters because it communicates that people are either earning more or they're earning less. Okay? But we don't compare the magnitude, so it focuses on the order, but not the magnitude. Okay, we can here, we can be interested in categorizing aspects to do even with what people's perceptions are. Okay, do they look at the organization with the right perception? Do they have what are the attitudes of people towards a particular service, a particular organization, whatever it is? And we can determine this using a Likert scale. So that means that if you are interested in understanding people's perception, the information that you are likely going to get is going to be, you're going to have ordinal data, and you might have to use the Likert scale to get that data. Okay, so that means that for you to represent that, you can use median and percentiles. Okay, you can't use means. Okay, you can't determine a mean for ordinal data. It does not really make a lot of sense. Okay, unless there is any serious justification for that. Okay, and then we can move to interval scale. Here, the key point here is about what we call the true zero. Sometimes you can see something to do with absolute zero. This can be used interchangeably. Okay, so with interval data, there is no absolute zero. The meaning of this is that the zero does not mean that there is nothing. The zero means something. The zero is basically communicating. If you get a thermometer and take the reading of the temperature for, let us say, ice, and it is 0 degrees centigrade, it doesn't mean that that zero doesn't mean nothing. Okay, that zero is meaningful. Okay, it doesn't mean there is no level of heat in the zero, because of course temperatures, it's about the degree of hotness or coldness. So that zero does not mean that there is nothing there. So that categorically falls under what we call interval scales. Okay, and then the other point is that we can do manipulations around them, and this can be addition and subtraction, and we can compare the differences. What we cannot do is that we cannot compare the ratios, and the ratios is what we are going to look at next. We shall know what ratios are. If you have a ratio of temperature in degrees centigrade, you have 20 over 10, what do you get? You get 2, right? And then you have 40 over 20, you get 2. And because you get 2, you can't make you can't What does it tell us? This is basically nothing that it tells us. Okay, so you can't compare ratios of interval data. That's the meaning there. Okay, so whether we are taking the temperature in degrees centigrade or Fahrenheit, it's all the same. Temperature is interval data, where 0 is not taken to be 0. 0 means something, so there is no true 0. And then the ratio scale. This is now the top level. Here, the 0 means 0. The 0 means there is nothing there. If you have 0 height, there is no height you're talking about. If there is zero weight, there is nothing there. If there is a 0 pulse, there is no pulse. You get it? So that is what we call ratio scale, or basically ratio data. Okay, and then so since it is the top level of measurement, it has all these other properties of these other scales, and therefore you can do anything with it. So meaning that the other levels of the other measurement scales have limitations that this one does not have. So you can do all the statistical analysis that you have, whether it is comparing ratios, whether it is about comparisons in terms of proportions and things like that. You can do all that with ratio data. Okay, it also allows calculations to do with coefficient of variance, of variation, which you cannot do with other parameters. So it's a good scale, right? So the question that I will pose to you is, having known these different levels of scales, if you're going to ask questions in your questionnaire, you need to understand the nature of data that you're going to get as respondents, because the as the respondents are going to give you, because the nature of the questions will determine whether you're going to get ordinal data, ordinal data, categorical data, or ratio data. So it's very important that you look at that. So if you're going to look at the different social demographic characteristics of a particular population, you will definitely look at age, sex, occupation, and all these things. Can you be able to categorize them into the different measurement scales that we have? And how can you phrase questions that appropriately match the scale that you want that data to be in?